Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2013, and this is the start of an interview with Nealon Click of Clinton Street. We're at the Senior Center. I'm Nancy Clark, interviewer for the Oral History Project, and this interview will become part of Hopkinton's Verbal Memories and History for current and future residents. Anne, if you'd like to begin, I know you were born and raised in Hopkinton. If you'd just like to start telling us a little bit about your family.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. It was really a treat for you to ask me to do this today. I did grow up in Hopkinton, and I have seen a lot of changes in the town. I'm 67 now, proud of it, because I'm retired from a job that I love very much. But anyways, let me start with my beginnings, which of course were my family, my parents. My father was Robert Nealon. He was at one time the town clerk of Hopkinton. He took over the appointment of town clerk in 1951 when the previous town clerk, Mr. Kean, died and passed away in the office, and they asked my father to become town clerk. And he stayed in that office for 20 years, and he himself passed away as town clerk in 1971. So, my mother grew up in Hopkinton. My father was from Milford originally and moved to Hopkinton right after the war. So I think my parents, just loved Hopkinton. My mother loved it. Her father was the water commissioner, so he was very involved with all the pipes that we're redoing in town, and the water department was very much part of our growing up. I grew up downtown, 18 Church Street beside St. John's, and my grandfather and my aunt lived right where the priests live now. So every day we would go over and say hi to Grandpa Sullivan, and Helen Danahy, who was the Barbara Jack Danahy's sister, and I never saw a gal smoke and chew gum at the same time before I met Helen. But she was very clever. She could do that. She could do a lot of different things at the same time. So just a character in my growing up. And people would go to their house to pay bills. And there was a lot of activity going on there. And it was a neat place to have my grandfather so close to us. Being close to St. John's, we were involved with St. John's. My mother was part of the Women's Catholic Guild. My mother, growing up in Hopkinton, were actually part of the Grange growing up. When they were a young couple, and the Grange was still active. We, as a family, would go and be involved with the Grange Strawberry Festival, whatever, and have meals at the Grange. And I think the best thing I remember is the baked ham and scalloped potato dinners that we would have. So the Grange was part of our growing up. My mother was a graduate of Regis, so on Sunday morning she would go to Regis and pick up the nuns and bring to St. John's for the CCD. We were involved. My mother and father were involved. My father was involved with Kiwanis. A lot of people who are hearing me will remember Kids Day, the old Kids Day, where you had to, sell tickets, and if you sold the most tickets, you would get a prize, get a ride in a helicopter, just real cool things, real neat things. Hopkinton was small. I want to say when my mother became clerk, my father, as I say, passed away in office in 71, and they appointed my mother town clerk. And the population, I would say, was around 5,900 maybe. And then as she stayed in office and the years went by, I can remember her coming home once and said, "We just passed 10,000. And before I left, we just passed 15,000. So the town has grown, for sure. But I'm going to talk about my growing up in town. And besides my parents, we had just a great time on Church Street. A lot of times we would, I'd say, keep track of the seasons because what was going on in our lives. So the word would go out that the chestnuts had come about. So that would mean chestnut fights. So we'd have to go all the way over to Grove Street and get bags and bags of chestnuts so that we could bring them back to Church Street and have chestnut fights. So we really did have a wonderful growing up. we were also fortunate enough to be able to go to the Cape in the summer. But when I was thinking about this, I can remember every time we would come home from the Cape, and it would be in August, and the leaves were so full, and the beginning of the fall colors would change. I would always say to myself, I love coming back to this town because of the colors and the common. You know, we would always come by the common as we'd come home to Hopkinton, come home to Church Street, and you know, it was just it's a lovely town. It still is a lovely town, and we all know that, don't we? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then my mother stayed town clerk, as you all know, until 97, and I became town clerk in 97 through an election. So I enjoyed it, and I just finished up in May, and Jerry Holland is now town clerk and doing a fabulous job. And I'm spending my time these days with the Friends of the Anniversary group. Not the town committee, but we are a side group helping with, by any means that we can, to help with the anniversary that's coming up in 2015, which is why I'm wearing my celebration bead. So anyways, one of the things we did also grow up with was the marathon. And I remember we'd be somewhere, not very far. If we'd meet someone on Cape Cod, they said, well, where are you from? I said, Hopkinton. So, where's Hopkinton? I said, oh, it's where the Hopkinton Marathon starts. I never really thought of it being other than the Hopkinton Marathon. But the marathon was, you know, it was sort of low-key when I was growing up. It really was low-key. Sometimes we would go away that weekend, because it was a 3-day weekend and my father could take the time off and leave town. My father, when he came back from the war, was, he had already finished school. He got a job as a teacher, and he was going to law school, and then he got appointed principal of Center School. So he was principal of Center School while I was going through Center School. And then he passed the bar and moved into his practice. But he was the principal when one of the fires happened at Center School. And that was in 52, 53, 54. And I can remember getting up in the middle of the night and walking down Church Ave, down Hayden Road, not knowing what we were going to see. But he got the call in the middle of the night that the school was on fire and that whole wing, you know, had burned. And then he was there during the process of it being rebuilt. So it was such an emotional time for our family, for him to be in the principal position and to see his school burn. So I'm sure everyone has highlights, and you know, I'm going to tell you some of my highlights, and that was one of them. You know, when you see your father so upset over, you know, something that he was so involved in, you know. But we had a lot of fun times, too. He was connected with the Army still when he was retired as a captain, so I think he had a little bit of pull. So come the Horribles Parade, the 4th of July, a couple of times we had one of those Army ducks that came to town, and they decorate the Army ducks, and we got our Church Street gang together, and we, you know, go on the parade according to what, you know, around the Army duck, which was really fun. So the Horribles Parade was a lot of fun when we were growing up. You know, a lot of uptown people, you know, were involved in it. What are some of my other, going back to the seasons, it was always great to know when we were getting a snowstorm, and Murphy's yard was right beside ours. So when their yard filled up with snow a couple of times, my mother suggested we build igloos. So I don't know where you grew up, Nancy, but if you had a snow belt, if you were near a snow belt, you know, the snowball fights, and the, you know, and what we did in the snow, because there were 8 of us in that house, so we were definitely dressed to go out for the, you know, for long periods of time, to give my mother a break. My father would often, if it got cold enough and there was no snow, we would often have, he would do the driveway, fill it with, so we could have a small skating rink. Other than that, we'd skate over at Thomas's, which is off of Ash Street. So you'd have to go down Fenton Street, go behind Reverend Thomas' house, and go down to his little ponds down there. different places. We'd always stay uptown. There was no car ride anywhere. If you wanted to go somewhere, you either walked or took your bike. So we would walk to wherever we were going to skate. Big Rock was also off of Ash Street, and that's where we'd go for a picnic. So, you just didn't go very far because there was usually just one car. And once that car left in the morning, that was it. So when my father would come home at night in the summer, we would go over to Sandy for that last swim, that cooling off, before we would climb into a hot bedrooms on the second floor of a home. No fans, So it was very nice growing up in Hopkinton. It really was. Let's see, my mother, I'm going to go back to my mother for a second because she did grow up in Hopkinton and went to school early on before the Grange was her schoolhouse.
And again, her first name was?
Mary Bernice.
Mary Bernice, and then she became Mary Nealon.
Yes, and she went by the name of Bunny.
Right.
A lot of people knew
That's
her as
what I
Bunny.
knew. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So she did go to school in the Grange. There was a group of people from down Hayden Road that went to all their schooling through the school down there, and then I don't know if they went back up, if they would have graduated uptown here or not. The old high school. I'm not sure whether or not that's where she graduated from, but her early memories that she would talk about was the trolley coming by her house, and you'll see some of the old postcards that are for sale, that they have trolley tracks, and some of them actually have trolleys in the pictures. And she lived down Hayden Row, so she would talk about the trolleys stopping in Hopkinton and picking up the workers to bring them to Framingham to work in the factories and bring them back to Hopkinton and Milford. So the trolley would start in Milford, stop in Hopkinton, go to Framingham. So that was sort of a neat thing, that I never knew about until later, A thought just came into my mind and left. My mother was also a teacher, and then stopped and started, and certainly raised her family. Then when she went back to school, she decided to go back to Framingham State. And she went into guidance. So she became the guidance teacher at the junior high level, which was a new position in the school system. So that was an interesting position for her to take on. And, after raising children and having such a busy home life and being such an intelligent gal, it was good to start something new and, have her own profession outside the home. So, she had a very full life. So it was neat. It was really good. I actually graduated in '64, but from Marion. But I certainly have a lot of still friends in '64. My husband, Sam Click, graduated in '64, and Sam went into the service. We got married. We raised our 3 children here in Hopkinton, and he ran a business. He was a teacher at Keefe Tech. When Keefe Tech opened, he was in that first grouping of teachers there, and he was the social studies and history teacher down there. He liked it a lot, but he always wanted to try something on his own, so he did go into landscaping, and he had his business for a long time. And I think a lot of people know him and remember him. He was a very kind, nice gentleman and good to deal with, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun to be with him. It was a lot of fun. We had some just wonderful times with certainly our family, and we had a very nice group of friends. We were very involved as our children grew up with the boosters. So we were very active with boosters, and we enjoyed that very much and had a lot of fun with that. Oh, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to talk to you about.
Well, I can maybe get us to go into a little bit more detail. You mentioned going up on Church Street, and you mentioned the Murphys as one of the families that lived there. Can you remember who else were neighbors
sure.
and friends of yours when you were little?
I absolutely can. Aubrey Doyle, the teacher Aubrey Doyle, was on Church Street.
He still is.
And still is, right? And he raised his family on Church Street, and we used to babysit a little bit. And the Murphys that I refer to was Mr. Murphy, who had a drugstore in Hopkinton.
And where was that?
It was, as you're looking at Bill's Pizza, Murphy's drugstore was to the right where the bank is. So that whole configuration that's there now is a little bit different. Or Murphy's was down to the left. There's some real good pictures of downtown Hopkinton, and maybe Murphy's was down to the left. I can remember Nenciata boy did a great tour of downtown Hopkinton, and he was able to point out where all the stores were. So, but anyways, they had, so before Katz's, there was Murphy's, and then Katz's came in. But Murphy's was an old time, the swivel stools, go in, you can get your soda, and then of course Brown Smith. The other people who lived there were across the street from us were the Woodses, Seymour Wood, and he had a funeral home there. That was a funeral home right across from 18 Church Street. I don't know if it's a single family home or not, but in fact, I just visited his daughter Sue yesterday. My Uncle Bill, who ran Brown and Smith's, lived above my grandfather, where I mentioned across from the church. And Days lived down the street, and they had a men's clothing store downtown, the Day family. So it'd be the library, the Days, where then the 3-family or 4-family apartment house. And then Aubrey Doyle lived there, the Woodses. And then there was another apartment house, and my grandfather, my Uncle Bill. And then all the way up the street, the Murphys on one side. And then the church, and then Callahan's. Oh, then the Superintendent O'Brien, remember Jack O'Brien, who was the superintendent for many years in Hopkinton, and he lived on the other side of St. John's. Helen O'Brien was a teacher in the school system for a long time.
I've heard the name. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then on the other side was Callahan's.
So someone had a men's clothing store in Hopkinton.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
What else do you remember was downtown? I mean, that's interesting because today to get clothes,
Right.
you definitely have
Yes.
to go out
Yeah.
of Hopkinton.
Yeah, that men's store Days was to the right of Brown Smith's again, where the bank is. So, like I said, that's done a couple of different things, but you could go there, and then there was Osborne's, was like a 5 and dime. That was down there. There was taxi stand. Remember John Hitchings, Hitchings Hardware? Well, he was actually also owned a taxi company in Hopkinton, and he was a bus driver. Plus, he had his little taxi. It was tiny, tiny, tiny little place between part of where the drugstore is now. So there was like, It's funny how all those little things changed. Actually, after the men's store went out, there was a doctor's office there. Again to the right of Bill's Pizza. A couple of little things where the hairdresser is now. Nancy's
Lovely lady.
Lovely, thank you, lovely lady. That was where Boston Edison. It was the Boston Edison store. You would go in there. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Riley, son ran that Boston Edison store, and you would go there and pay your bills, and go there if you had any trouble, I guess, and if you wanted to have service. Then Woods' Meat Market, Kalala's, so Woods', Kalala's, Boston Edison. Emma's. All changed. Emma's, you've heard of Emma's. That was the woman's clothing store. Yeah, that's where you go and get your nylons and your scarves and pins and Rose's. Have you heard of Rose's, the beauty parlor? Mm-hmm. It's where Gourmet Coffee is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where we went to get our hair done. Dr. Annunciata's, of course, where he used to live. He ran his practice out of his home right on Main Street.
And which one of the houses on the same side as the Hopkinton Gourmet?
Yes, yep.
Pillars? One of the ones with the pillars?
No, that was that was where the priests lived.
All right.
That was the parish house for the priests. Yeah. So I know it. gosh, it's amazing, huh?
Well, and I've heard a lot about Dr. Annunziata, and he made house calls. And
Oh my gosh. Every time Sam would go, we would go there for something. He would give him a bag of shoes. He said, Sam, you need something. I'm going to give you some shoes.
oh, how sweet.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was a character.
Interesting. Wow. And then you mentioned, you touched upon government a lot because of your family's wonderful legacy in the town clerk's office. You mentioned also a connection with the water department. I wondered if you could go into that a little bit more in detail, and maybe anything else you remember about, the old-time water department or the old-time fire department or police department for that matter when you were growing up.
Right. Well, the only thing I can, I was young, so I wasn't
Right.
totally, up with what was going on. But with the fire department, it was a volunteer fire department. And the police department was very small. I mean, we knew who the policemen were, they knew who we were. And, so things happened a little bit differently then, I would say, in a lot of small towns, that, as the case may be. If the police thought that maybe you were out a little too late and maybe your parents would want you home by, a certain time or whatever, that type of thing. But definitely the fire department was a volunteer. All the guys, who worked in town were in the volunteer fire department.
Okay.
Yeah. And the police, I can remember actually when they were in the town hall, on the bottom level of the town hall, very small. That little office down there that the custodian has now. That's where they were sort of, centered. And they would have their phones just actually from my reading in the books of, the town books. The police phone might be hooked up to someone's home phone, like Jerry Belka. There wasn't.
Who was the police chief? He was the police chief when I moved here.
Yes, yeah.
In 84.
But, sure. Before him was Mr. Garrison, and, I don't remember him being at the town hall. I think that, if you needed to call him, you called him at home.
Do you know if would there have been a jail cell there when they were in
There
town
was.
hall? Or?
There was, yeah. Didn't really need it.
Mm-hmm.
The town clerk's office was in our home on Church Street, in the front of the house. So, and then when we moved from Church Street to Hayden Row Street, it moved with us up to Hayden Row. And then after my father passed away, my mother found a little niche in the town hall before the town hall was done over, and she proceeded to move all of the records down there. She and Maxine Adams established it down there, and they did a real good job of, changing things around so that it was more public and open.
So when there was, sounds like a lot of sort of office outsourcing.
Yes.
Was town hall smaller, or was it just not all finished off?
Well, it's funny. I'm just trying. I don't think that the only time I would go to the town hall would be on election days. Like my father would be running the election from the town hall, and that's where it would be. In the back there was a kitchen, so there would be food for the election workers in the town hall. Or when there was a whisk night, is that how
The card game?
Yeah, the card game. Those are the only times that I would go to the town hall.
Interesting.
Oh, that's not true. We also had dance lessons there on the second floor. Yeah. So the town hall really was a meeting place.
A community building.
A community building.
More than an office.
But for my age, from my memory, it would be, the dance lessons, the election days, helping with the whisk parties, so it is different, yeah.
It's interesting. Do you remember, this is getting specific, but approximately what years your father was town clerk?
Yes.
Just so people know when we're talking.
He was appointed in 1951, and he passed away in 1971.
All right.
Yeah,
And then your mother was from then until the
97.
mid-90s. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you.
Yeah.
That's
right.
great. It's a great legacy. Yeah. Anything else about, you did a great job of talking about some of the celebrations in the marathon and the Horribles Parade, and you mentioned the Grange. Anything else about the Grange Hall that you can recall. Now that's the building that today is the Historical Society, correct?
That's correct.
And you said it was one of the outlying community elementary schools that, I forget if it was your mother, you said went to school there.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
so that's
yeah.
building's been used for a lot.
Yeah, I think that people will, and I think this is going to come about during the anniversary year, how many schools there were in Hopkinton, what education has always been a big factor in Hopkinton. And it's interesting too, because certainly we got the money for the town from Harvard. So isn't it interesting, the fact that education was so important, and I really hope that, I'm sure it will happen, that there'll be lots of nice stories about, the tracing of education all over Hopkinton. I mean, there were small school buildings in Woodville, all over different places in town, all throughout this history of the town, from what I can gather.
Can you, since you brought up education again, talk a little bit more about your education and the buildings that you went to school in?
Oh, sure.
You mentioned one of your teachers. You mentioned Mrs. Riley. Anything you can remember about school, teachers, activities there, friends?
Sure. Yeah, be glad to. We went to school at Center School. And when the Center School was under remodeling, we actually went to the next school, 1 Ash Street, to have our gym. And then, there was never a gym in the school. So we would go to the 1 Ash Street, and then we'd actually have a little area outside the cafeteria that we'd have gym, or outside.
Yeah.
And it was Mr. Welsh was our gym teacher. He was a famous football coach back in the 50s.
Is that Chick Welch Field?
Chick Welch.
Okay.
Chick Welch was our gym teacher. Yeah. And so the school was, we went right through the 6th grade at the Center School. And then junior high opened up. The new high school opened up, and when I went to the
And that's the one that was the junior, senior high.
Yes.
That became the middle high. That
Yes.
now is the middle school.
Yes,
Okay.
right. So we went into the 7th and 8th grade. My sister, they opened up an area up there for the 6th grade, so my sister was in the 6th grade, I was in the 7th, and, then, so that building was great, because the other school was getting crowded, But Center School was, was just always for all of us, right there.
Did it have a playground back then? I'm just curious if did you ever use the common? Did they use the common for play, for recess? Or?
No, we had just the back of the school. No, we didn't, no. But I remember in the summertime when the fountain would run.
Really?
Yeah, it used to, the water used to be running in that fountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got one of the prints of the fountain as a relic in my kitchen.
Do you?
Yes, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Never saw it run.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the common was very pretty. We, like I said, that's would be where Kids' Day would be held. So the common still has
Right.
that.
And when was Kids' Day?
It
What
was
did you do?
in the end of the summer, like first or second weekend when we'd go back to school.
All right.
Well, actually, it'd have to be a little bit later, because we'd have to go to school for a month or so, and they pass out the tickets. Now, that was run by Kiwanis back then. So you'd have to, sell your tickets for about a month, and that supposedly helped pay for the Kids' Day.
All right. And what was Kids' Day like? What did you
Oh,
do?
little games, just like the HPTA is now, and there would always be a thrill of a helicopter, somebody coming, and getting a ride in a helicopter. The kids' bicycle parade was big, pony rides, just local things. The HPTA Family Day now reminds me of Kids' Day.
All right. Oh, that's nice.
Yes, yeah.
And you said that when you were young, most of what you did was in the in-town area, because that's where you lived.
Yes.
Did you as you grew older, get friends that lived in other parts of Hopkinton and bike there, or
Right.
was it all sort of pretty neighborhoody?
I know, it was pretty neighborhoods, really. I mean, you really stuck within your neighborhood. I remember once finally getting permission to go down to East Hopkinton, which was where I live now, and I had a girlfriend who lived down there. And, I had worked so hard to get permission to go. And, yeah, it was a big deal to leave your neighborhood. It really was. Yeah, it's funny, huh?
Yeah, and so we all know Hopkinton's changed so much. Do you have any ideas, or what do you attribute some of the changes to when the town really started to gain a lot of population?
Yes, I would say 495. Yeah, and another thing I was thinking of too is there was at one point before 495 had come on to the radar, the thought of having an airport in Hopkinton. That's that also was on somebody's radar, and that was scary. That was scary for a lot of people in Hopkinton who were really trying to maintain Hopkinton as it was, and it just didn't happen. It didn't.
About when was that? About a decade?
Let's see. Now, 495 opened in '68, so I would say early '60s. Maybe.
Yeah, and did it get far enough? Did the plans or suggestions for the airport get far enough that some people in town actually mobilized to fight against it? It was sort of like this Milford Casino, or was it all just sort of talk?
No, there was a lot of public conversation about it, and that's about what I can remember. Then there are records about it at the town clerk's office if anybody wants to look into it. But it was a very interesting, again, because of the involvement with my parents, I was more aware of it. I can remember them just couldn't believe that an airport was, the placement of it. I mean, it had gone as far as where was it going to be.
And where were they talking about?
I think I want to say closer to Framingham, maybe, but I'm not.
On the
really.
outskirts, yeah. I've heard in that sort of Framingham, Ashland, Holliston, Hopkinton, sort of in that end of town.
It wasn't that, yeah, I can't, but it's an interesting story. It's part of the, it's interesting.
And it would have really changed the town.
Oh, well, 495 changed the town, which was fine.
Yeah. Well, at that point, when 495 comes in, there's so much more opportunity to commute to work. I would assume other places, and I know that's what brought us
here.
Absolutely. The location and the highways.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I can remember as a parent, now my children, and the folks that settled in Hopkinton, and what they brought with them was just fabulous. Like the soccer, soccer, what's soccer? And it was just, we loved it. We loved it. I mean, Hopkinton was just football.
All right, so you saw an expansion of sports.
Yes, an expansion of sports.
Because of that.
And one of my children just was soccer all the way, it just, there was no negative thought about 495, and as people started moving to town. And the reason was they loved Hopkinton. As they moved in, they just looked around and, said, oh, this is, I've been looking for this town. I got that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. So throughout the ages, it doesn't matter what the decade, people have come here because they really like it. It is a nice place to live. Yeah. And you have such a wonderful perspective because of the fact that you were the town clerk and your family, your mom and dad were town clerks. But is there anything else you can think of running across in the town records that, like the airport that you mentioned, that just sort of shows what Hopkinton used to be like or how it's changed? Anything else in particular that?
Probably the development of the water department was interesting. The votes. If anybody chooses to look through the town reports, it's very interesting. How the town, because we're self-governing, and I say we're self-governing because that town, we're both active in town government. I mean, we vote what we want in Hopkinton, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So early on, we voted what we wanted, that expand the water department, expand the water in Hopkinton. Huge. The sewers coming into Hopkinton. That was, what an undertaking for a small town. And I know it happened in the area. I know it happened a lot in our, in Metro West. But we're a small town to take that on, and how bright and how courageous of the people who were leading Hopkinton to do that planning. Weren't we fortunate to have Chuck Zedek? Weren't we fortunate to have a gentleman like Chuck Zedek?
Yeah, who did a lot with zoning, right?
He did zoning.
And other things.
Right, but I'm sure he brought in a lot of influence. Okay, this is how you do the other part of it, You do have to have sewer. You do have to have town. Expand your town water.
Yeah. And what other names can you remember from the water department or the sewer department when a lot of that was going on?
I'm going to, certainly Mr. McIntyre, Franny McIntyre in the water department. I'm going to go a little bit off. Ernie Fecto was very active in town as a gentleman who did a lot. Paul Phipps. Now these are the people in my growing up and influenced me. Ernie Fecto, Paul Phipps, Mr. Bartlett. He was the treasurer. He modernized the way we do our books. He took it on, and he that small nucleus, and it's okay that it was small then. I'd like to see it bigger now, certainly, but that small nucleus of men, gentlemen, and women who saw what the town needed and acted on it. Yes, you're a small town, but you have a lot of expenses because you're going to expand. So therefore, let's look at our tax base. Let's look at what we have to do, slowly but surely. And they passed that on. I felt that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, the 495 did bring so much development, and then the new population led to a lot of expansion of the infrastructure.
Yes, oh my gosh, South Street. I mean, that was huge.
Yeah, what do you remember about South Street early on and how it's transitioned?
Right. What I remember about South Street was some people weren't quite accepting of it. They didn't get it yet, that, we needed it. We needed to have that, So luckily it came. Luckily it was, I think it worked out good. Maybe it could have expanded. I don't know. I'm not in, not sure, but I think it was a good thing for Hopkinton. It really was. We are a bigger town, and we do have more expenses. So therefore, we need other ways of raising taxes other than just the taxpayers' real estate taxes.
Right. So the commercial area there, it seems like a very good area for it, right along the highway.
Exactly.
But people were resistant to that.
Yes. Yeah. But I'm just, I guess I want to say again how impressed I was growing up, maturing at town meeting. I mean, I went to town meeting as a young parent, and when people would stand up and they would be talking from their heart, from their heads and from their hearts, like, we need to do this, and we need to do it because we want to, and it was just so, it was impressive. It impressed me. It really impressed me.
Can you think of some specific people over the years that you remember speaking at town meeting a lot in the olden days?
Well, certainly we're going to talk about Mr. Pratt, and he was a gentleman who had a certain outlook, and it was all common sense. All common sense, Again, Mr. Zedek was before Mr. Zedek was
Moderator
was Mr. Rooney. I was trying to remember his first name, but Mr. Rooney was very good. He was excellent. He came level-headed to the meeting. This is what we're going to. This is the agenda of the town for this year, And he let people speak, and it was good. And that same with Mr. Zedek, And I think Bruce is doing it. Bruce is definitely doing it.
It's an unbelievable job. Yeah, it's a hard job.
It's a hard job. It really is a hard job, but there is an agenda. So, that that certainly, and all the work that, and part of that, what has changed in Hopkins is the pre-work that all the departments do. I think you probably can.
Yeah, if you could go into that a little bit,
Well,
that would be wonderful.
It's funny, we're talking about this government, but that's good.
Well, and that's a specialty of yours.
Well, I see it. I see that at town meeting, the homework should be done and reviewed and ready for the discussion of a certain limit. That's how I see it.
And so you've seen over the years a lot more has to be done ahead of time.
And let the people who are involved and interested in, what's on the agenda, the warrant, individually, let them go to the meetings that are involved with those warrant articles. Voice their opinions then, get exposed to it then. Don't show up at town meeting not knowing what, oh, we're going to do that. And that's just my opinion. And town meeting is still for that purpose, though, to find out what's going on in the town. Don't get me wrong, it is. And I love it when people come and say, can we discuss this more?
Do you think in the 50s and 60s and 70s, before the big population boom, as the town was smaller, do you think a larger percentage of the town knew what was going on?
What I want to say is I think that the people who may be coming to Hopkinton now aren't identifying with government because they may have come from larger communities where their government is removed from their existence.
Mm-hmm.
If you come from a county government or if you come from a city government, you don't think about it. And I can remember people coming in or calling, what's town meeting? What is town meeting? I said, well, that's where we can govern our community. And they had, we can. So I think those, to answer your question, those people who were inclined to be involved were involved. I think now, because we still have the type of government that we have, open town meeting, that people should be more involved. Because we'll be more of a unified community if more people come.
Interesting. Great discussion of government. Another thought that just popped into my head to ask you another open-ended question. So you grew up here, and then you raised a family here, and I wondered if you sort of saw any comparisons between your life growing up, you and your siblings, and your own children, whether it's what they did in school, after school, for fun. Do you see some of the changes between just those two generations?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest change was the sports. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
When we were growing up, I didn't get involved with sports until I hit high school. And sports are so much, introduced so young now.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And with my children, again, too, it was, the third grade, the fourth grade, the soccer would come into our, family,
Right.
So I definitely would say the sports is the biggest change. But if you're talking to my children, they'll say, we had the best of times. And if you talk to me, I will say, I had the best of times. So my children loved growing up in Hopkinton. We did live out. We lived out when we were settled. We settled on Clinton Street. So it was a little different than mine, where I grew up in Hopkinton, where I grew up uptown, which was a lot of fun. Walking to the library, walking down to get the groceries. I forgot to tell you, there was a little grocery store, Mary McDonough's real estate office,
Mm-hmm.
which is now Action Copy. That was a grocery store. His the McDonough family had a small grocery store in that area, in that where Action Copy is, so it's cool.
So there was competition.
A little bit, yeah. Actually, you're right, because there was Colellis, there was Woods's, but anyways, my children, in fact, a lot of them are coming back to Hopkinton. My son is back in town. A couple of his friends are moving back to town. They're all still close. What a great group of friends they've all been able to, I mean, I know this, they can stay in touch, with all the
Social media.
social media. I know that for sure. I've gone, how did you know that? How did you know that? So anyways, it's really cool. But there is a difference, a little bit of difference, and it's definitely the sports. Yeah.
Good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Is there anything else that you want to say before we close?
No, I think this has been, I hope I've added a little bit of something to the history, or not, just tell you about my growing up in Hopkinton. It was really nice.
Well, you've done a very, very good job, and we did have a bit of a conversation about government, much more so than I've had with anyone else, which is good, because you do know so much about that. So, all right, well, thank you so much, and we'll close this interview. This is the end of the Thursday, November 21st, 2013 interview with Nealon Click. The interviewer was Nancy Clark.